$13 billion. A single ship, that number plus billions more in research and delays, has subjected USS Gerald R. Ford to relentless criticism. A financial disaster, a waste of taxpayer money, a foolish investment. But what if I told you right now that all of that is completely wrong? Those $13 billion didn't buy a bigger ship to show off. They bought something else entirely, an invisible, cold weapon, a machine that crushes time itself. When it comes online, the question of major losses is instantly flipped on its head. It is not the United States that pays the price. It is the opponent, anyone who dares to remain within its reach. They are pulled into an industrial nightmare. Relentless pressure. No breathing room, no escape. Radar screens glow red. Missile stocks run dry. Resolve collapses. A final outcome delivered by a pace that never stops. That is the real loss, severe, absolute, and beyond recovery. Are you ready to keep watching to see how this weapon actually works? Every time the U.S. Navy unveils a new aircraft carrier, the crowd rushes to debate the obvious. Its massive size, blistering speed, the sheer number of aircraft packed onto the deck. Those details shine like a blockbuster film, spectacular, impressive, but they are not the key that decides a war. Aircraft carriers do not win by charging forward like missiles. They win by refusing to stop, refusing to slow their tempo. With the older Nimitz class, the limiting factor was time. Only about 120 sorties per day under normal conditions, with a maximum of 150. Aircraft would launch, then have to return, refuel, and rearm like a clumsy Formula One pit stop, where steam pressure had to be slowly rebuilt for the catapults, and the island's superstructure blocked movement, causing traffic bottlenecks on deck. Every second of delay created a pause, an opportunity for the enemy. The Ford class shatters that limitation. It pushes the island's superstructure aft, optimizing deck flow like a perfectly engineered Formula One circuit. Smooth movement, minimal friction, no bottlenecks. The result? Around 160 sorties per day under normal conditions, surging to 270 inches a crisis, an increase of roughly 33%, a staggering gap, 270 versus 120. Not a single strike wave, but an unrelenting flood, turning the sky into a sustained nightmare. $13 billion is spent on this industrial process. A rearmament pipeline like an ultra-fast pit stop, where aircraft move in and out without interruption. When the tempo never slows, pressure accumulates not in waves, but like an unstoppable flow. That is when true destruction unfolds, like a thriller with no final act. So where does the $13 billion really go? It goes into a physical revolution designed to eliminate friction. First is the heart of the ship, the electromagnetic aircraft launch system, EMLS. Nimitz-class carriers use steam catapults, a technology dating back to the 1950s. It's like hitting an aircraft with a sledgehammer to launch it. Violent, jerky, damaging to the airframe, and requiring thousands of tons of fresh water to generate steam. The Ford class's EMLS uses linear induction motors. It relies on electrical current to accelerate aircraft with smooth yet immense force. The result? It can not only launch fully loaded strike fighters that steam catapults struggle with, but also finely tuned launch power to deploy ultralight unmanned aerial vehicles (UAVs) in the future. That $13 billion buys absolute flexibility. Next comes the advanced weapons elevators. Don't let the name fool you. These are not supermarket freight elevators. Older elevators relied on cable systems, slow, hazardous, and prone to electrical sparking. On the Ford class, cables are eliminated entirely. These elevators move using electromagnetic force, capable of lifting 24,000 pounds over 10 tons of ordnance at 45 meters per minute, roughly twice the speed of the previous generation. More importantly, they are redesigned so they no longer pass through crew living spaces, creating a dedicated vertical pathway that moves bombs directly from the magazines to the flight deck. Finally, there is the deck layout itself. By pushing the island's superstructure farther aft and shrinking its footprint, the U.S. Navy created a massive pit stop zone. Now, refueling and bomb loading can take place simultaneously at the same spot, something Nimitz-class carriers simply cannot do because of space constraints. All of these power-hungry systems are sustained by two new A-1B nuclear reactors, generating 3 times the electrical output of the previous class. The money was spent to turn the ship into a perfectly sealed industrial system. Smoother launches, faster movement, and zero bottlenecks. To understand why this $13 billion investment is effectively a death sentence for any opponent, look at their radar screens. Rival powers in the Pacific have built their strategies around A2, AD, anti-access area denial layers of dense defensive systems. Their plan is simple: absorb the first wave, then exploit the window when U.S. carriers are forced to pause to regroup and rearm. But with the Ford class, that concept of a pause no longer exists. As the first wave of bombs has barely ended and the smoke has not yet cleared, the second wave is already appearing on the horizon. Then the third, the fourth. This is saturation attack at an industrial scale. The opponent's air defense system is forced into a brutal economic equation. They must fire interceptor missiles costing millions of dollars each to stop the incoming storm. But their missile stockpiles are finite, while the assembly line on the deck of the Ford is nearly endless. By the 24th hour of combat, the nightmare scenario unfolds. Enemy radars are still flashing red, but the launch tubes are empty. Operators are exhausted and psychologically broken. The severe losses, referenced in the video title, are precisely this moment when a defensive system worth hundreds of billions of dollars is reduced to useless scrap metal simply because it has run out of ammunition. The opponent does not lose because they are weak, but because they are financially and operationally bankrupt in the face of sustained pressure from a $13 billion ship. Time is the only resource that cannot be bought in war, and the Ford class was designed to strip the enemy of every last second they have. When you look globally, the gap between the real thing and imitation becomes brutally clear. Many countries operate aircraft carriers that rely on ski jump ramps. Their limitation is not only that they can launch aircraft with lighter payloads, but more critically, they cannot launch heavy airborne early warning and command aircraft, AWACS. That leaves their fleets like fighters wearing blindfolds. By contrast, the Ford class, with its electromagnetic catapults, can put the entire combat brain into the sky. And most importantly, nuclear power. In the vast expanse of the Pacific where bases are separated by thousands of miles, fuel is a chain around the neck. Conventional carriers must constantly pause to refuel, turning them into slow, vulnerable targets. USS Gerald R. Ford is different. Its 2 nuclear reactors allow it to operate continuously for 25 years, sustaining high speed without limitation. It is a predator that never needs to sleep. $13 billion, therefore, is a strategic bargain. It forces potential adversaries into an arms race they know they will lose economically. They must spend hundreds of billions of dollars building air defense systems, stockpiles, and escort fleets just to counter a single American ship. This is strategic checkmate. The United States did not buy this ship to fight every day. They bought it to send a cold message. We can sustain this pressure in your backyard indefinitely. You cannot. True deterrence does not come from how hard you can strike, but from the certainty your opponent has that you will never be exhausted. In conclusion, returning to the initial question, is $13 billion for the USS Gerald R. Ford an expensive mistake? The answer is no. In the geopolitical chessboard, it is the cheapest insurance for dominance. This ship is not just a floating airport. It is an industrial machine optimized to crush the will and resources of any adversary. For the US $13 billion is just a line in the budget, but for any enemy, the price of facing it is total destruction of infrastructure and military capability. Who will be the king of the oceans in the 21st century? Leave your thoughts below. I'll read and pin the sharpest analytical comments. If you want to continue decoding these massive war machines, hit subscribe and join our fleet today. Thank you for watching. See you on the deck in the next video.